Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, the NHL Entry Draft is complete. So I'm going to be going over each one of the Blues picks, giving my thoughts on the player, and then at the end, just sort of giving an overall draft grade for how I thought the St. Louis Blues did in their draft. Plus, Ville Husso was traded for a third-round pick. Going to talk about that. Going to talk about my thoughts on the trade, plus what that means for the Blues' backup goalie situation next season. Really fun episode. I love these post-draft episodes. A lot of fun here. Make sure you stay tuned. Going to be a good one.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman, as always, and got a really fun episode for you guys today. The NHL Entry Draft wrapped up just a few hours ago, and I'm going to be going over every single one of the Blues picks here in this first segment and a half. And like I said, second segment, talking about Ville Husso. But without further ado, let's just hop into this draft. But first, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Blues your first listen, free and available on all podcast platforms. Thank you guys for making me part of your YouTube channel and all that stuff, doing really well lately. The draft reaction is performing really, really well. So I really appreciate all the support. I've been getting on the channel recently. It really helps with the drive to put out good content for you guys, still figuring things out as a solo host. So appreciate all your feedback and all your support lately. It's been a lot of fun. So without further ado, let's talk about the draft. The Blues started things off, I thought, pretty hot, picking Jimmy Snuggerud at the 23rd overall slot, a right winger who is committed to play at the University of Minnesota next season. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about him. Probably a majority of the prospect talk is going to be around him just because the Blues didn't pick again until the third round. And you can only really say so much about third round picks. Like, yeah, those guys could turn into NHL caliber players. But as of right now, there's just not a whole lot to say about them. So that being said, though, let's talk about Jimmy Snuggerud. I'm really, really happy with this pick. I think the Blues can afford to pick a guy like Jimmy Snuggerud in the sense that he is a high ceiling player, but he's going to take a little bit of time to get to that floor where he's able to play NHL games. He's a guy with a lot of upside. He already has shown that he has a wicked lethal shot, similar to the route that they took last year with Zach Bolduc. They seem to be going for taller guys with a good shot. Jimmy Snuggerud is a little bit over 6'1", only 188, so that's another thing he's kind of got to fill into his frame and bulk up a little bit. But the Blues don't seem to shy away from picking players like that. We've seen it in the past where they pick a guy like Tage Thompson who needs to fill into his frame, or even a guy like Jordan Kyrou who definitely needed to fill into his frame a little bit as well. And we know how those guys worked out. Obviously, they traded Tage Thompson, but he had a spectacular season this year. Once he, like we said, grew into his frame and became sort of that bigger, bulked up guy. So the Blues aren't afraid to take a guy with a little bit of struggle in terms of his frame in that sense, because that's something that you can change through training and development and growth and that sort of thing. So I'm not too worried about that. That was sort of one of the bigger knocks on him. But let's talk about some of the positives. Like I said, he's got an absolutely lethal shot. He's a guy that you can really just construct a power play around. One thing the Blues have been missing in the last few years is a guy that can just rip one-timers on the power play, Alex Ovechkin style. Obviously, nobody can do it like Ovi can, but, if you get a guy where you can just plant him at the top of the circle and sort of put four other passers out there with him and just feed him pucks and let him rip, that's going to be a recipe for success on the power play. And that's exactly what Jimmy Snuggerud has done with the U.S. development team. That's, I'm assuming, exactly what he's going to do with Minnesota, and then eventually exactly what he's going to do with the St. Louis Blues. He's got that wicked shot, and he's got a lot of range on that shot. He doesn't just have to be in close. He can be even as far out as the blue line, and he's still got like almost a defenseman's worthy cannon of a slap shot when need be. He's a really, really good player when it comes to shooting the puck. An area that maybe struggles a little bit is his playmaking. I think playmaking wise, he's a little bit of a step behind other guys in his draft class, but that's not to say that he can't develop that part of his game. Playmaking is something that can come with time and can come with just, developing hockey IQ, developing a sense for your teammates. So you can't teach a shot like he has, but something like playmaking, I think that can come along. That's why I'm not super, super worried about that. I think that he can develop into a good playmaker. But even if he doesn't, he still has that wicked shot that's going to make him lethal. He could score, 25 plus goals at an NHL level if he hits his full ceiling, just because of how deadly his shot is at such a young age and with such a light frame. If he grows and gets even stronger, that shot's just going to even continue to get better and better. I'm really happy with that. And then an area that I think is really underrated in his game that not a ton of people were talking about is his defense. He's a guy that can go out there and play tenacious defense on the wing, something that the Blues really value, something that they've valued in their last few picks. He's a bigger guy. He plays a gritty, hard-nosed game, but he also isn't afraid to, have that skill and speed game. Little bit of a slower skater now, but again, that's something that can grow in time. But yeah, that defense is something that I think is really, really important in his game and why I think he projects to be an NHLer, almost more so than his shot. Defense at the wing position is a hot commodity in the NHL. Not a whole lot of wingers are, elite defenders, and not to say that Jimmy Snuggerud will be an elite defender at that position, but just the fact that he's already shown potential of being a really good defensive player at that position projects him well for like a middle six role, a guy that can go out there. And if you're getting hemmed in, he can, go into the corner, win puck battles, take guys off the puck. But at the same time, he can go down the other end and rip a one-timer into the back of the net with wicked accuracy and wicked power as well. I'm really, really happy with the pick. I think he's a guy that's going to develop in a couple years for the Blues. He might stay in college for a little bit. He has family history at Minnesota. I think his father played there. So I wouldn't be surprised if he stuck around Minnesota for at least a year, 2, maybe even 3. But that's okay, because when you have an offense as deep as the St. Louis Blues have, you don't need your first-round draft pick to step in right away. They have a bit of room to grow there, a little bit of room to let him grow. So I'm really happy with that pick. In this upcoming second segment, I'm going to be going over the rest of the Blues picks, and then I'm going to be talking about the Ville Husso trade. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Excuse me. But before I get into that, got to tell you guys about our good friends over at BetOnline. Now, betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs. Nope, not this year's NHL playoffs. Sorry. This year's Major League Baseball regular season and this year's NHL offseason. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news every season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports, news, and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. All right. So, not only the Blues picked Jimmy Snuggerud, but they also picked a couple more players. So, I'm going to be going through some of their other picks and talking about what I think about them. Their third round pick, their first pick, the pick that they got in the Ville Husso trade that I'm going to be talking about here in a little bit, was Alexandre Kasamaki. Another, bigger forward, 6 feet tall, 196 pounds. A good skilled playmaking center, good puck skills in tight areas, can make defenders miss to create some offense. I'm all for it. I think centers are a very valuable position in this league, and you can never have too many centers. You can never, have too many guys that can play make at that position as well. And a third round pick doesn't have a ton of potential to necessarily crack the lineup anytime soon. I think that picking a guy like Kasamaki is pretty good for the St. Louis Blues, or Kaskimaki, sorry, is great for the St. Louis Blues just because he adds, just another potential turnout at that position. It's not like they're banking on him to turn into a great player, but if he does, that's great for them. They have even more depth at that position, even more skill at that position. Similar to Snuggerud, one of his knocks is that he's got a little bit slower foot speed, but again, that's something that can develop. That's something that can grow a little bit just with some skating drills, all that stuff. So I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. He also can play on the penalty kill, which is valuable, and win a ton of faceoffs, which, means that if he does develop into an NHL player, he could turn into like a fourth line guy, a guy that just goes out there, wins puck battles, creates a little bit of offense, and wins you some faceoffs. So I'm happy with that pick. Moving on, 15 picks later, they finally picked their first defenseman of the draft in Michael Butchinger. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Apologies there. Similar to their previous pick, a guy that, isn't necessarily a super, super high ceiling player, but could definitely come in and play some NHL games. He was a top 4 defenseman on his team, the Guelph Storm, which I believe is where Robbie Fabry played. I don't know why I remember that, but there's that. He's a really good all-around defenseman. I think he had himself a pretty large amount of points in his most recent OHL season. The guy that, is going to give you sound play in all 3 ends of the ice from the defensive position. He's a good playmaker. He's not quite the best puck mover in the world, but when he needs to, he can, fire some shots from the point or find the open guy. He's not going to create offense completely on his own as much, but he can still move the puck. He can still make. He can still make the right play from an offensive standpoint. And he's very, very reliable in the defensive end as well. I think another good pick there for the St. Louis Blues. Moving on, pick 120, Arseny Koromislov. Out of St. Petersburg, Russia, a left-handed defenseman, another left-handed defenseman, 6'3", 180. Similar to Snuggerud, a big, taller guy that still needs to fill into his frame, which I like. I like that you pick these undersized guys because the only, best case scenario, they fill out into their frame and they become a 10 times better player with that size and that strength. You're sort of banking on the future. And when you have a deep team like the St. Louis Blues, you can afford to miss on one of those guys every once in a while if, the other guy fills into his frame and becomes a beast. So sort of a similar route there. It's hard to project these Russian players just because the strength of competition over there is so hard. Koromislov didn't impress too much in the in his Russian junior league. But again, it's just hard because of the strength of competition there. He's a big defenseman, obviously, with a long reach, and he's actually, honestly, a very strong skater, which is good for his size. I think that, if he does turn into an NHL player, it'll be that skating and that size that sort of sets him apart from some of the other prospects. He's not like the most flashy player by any means, but he's a guy that's going to go out there and give you solid minutes. If he does turn into an NHL player, he's a guy that, you can rely on in the defensive end, similar to their previous pick. So I like that. Just picking reliable defensive ability defensemen. You really can't go wrong there. The 152 pick, they really just love picking guys who we might have a hard time pronouncing. They picked another left-handed defenseman, Marc-Andre Gaudette. Okay, that one wasn't as bad. Hard to talk too much about him. Late round pick. Another big defenseman, 6'3", 180, similar, kind of skinny, but can fill into his frame. Really hard shot, decent hand, decent vision, decent mobility, maybe a little bit below average. But again, a guy that if he does turn into an NHLer, you're going to like his shot. You're going to like his defensive ability. You're going to like his puck moving skills. And finally, with their last pick at 184, they picked an undersized guy in Landon Sim, a 5'10", 166-pound right winger. He is a skilled player. So, he's a flashy player. You kind of got to be when you're undersized. He can play on the penalty kill, which is surprising given his size. He's pretty tenacious, almost like a Brad Marchand-esque sort of little guy in that aspect. So, I think if you're going to take a flyer on a late round guy, why not make it an undersized forward? Kind of goes against the status quo for Blues picks. They love picking these big forwards. I don't remember who tweeted it out. I think it was Gabe Foley tweeted out something like, or it was in his article that the Blues haven't picked a forward below 6'1" in the first round in a very long time. And they continued the trend this year, and they, didn't take anyone below 6 feet until that final round of the draft for them. So again, another guy who probably will turn into nothing, but if he turns into something, there you go. Bonus points there for getting a late round steal. In this upcoming third and final segment, I'm going to be talking about the Ville Husso trade, what it means for the Blues next season, and more. Make sure you stay tuned. Okay, so middle of the draft. First of all, there were a ton of trades. I think this morning it was announced that the Blues were trading the negotiation rights of Ville Husso to the Detroit Red Wings for a 3rd round pick, which first of all, just right off the bat, that's amazing for the St. Louis Blues. They got their earliest pick besides their 1st rounder through this trade. And they got it for a guy that they weren't even going to bring back regardless. Basically, what that means is the Detroit Red Wings wanted Ville Husso so bad, and they were so worried about the other teams bidding for him that they were willing to part with a 3rd round pick, which is pretty valuable, all things considered, in order to just get the first rights to negotiate for Ville Husso. There's in 9 times out of 10 in a situation like this, Ville Husso just walks and signs with the highest bidder in free agency. But this time, the Detroit Red Wings are willing to say, you know what? We like this guy so much. We like what we see out of him so much that we're willing to part with a 3rd round pick for someone that we could have just tried to go after in free agency. Anyways, the Blues got a 3rd round pick when they very, very likely could have, and you arguably should have, gotten absolutely nothing for him. Best case scenario in however many years, that 3rd round pick turns into a decent player, and you're like, wow, look at that. They got him for an expiring Ville Husso deal. And you know what? If that guy turns into nothing, great. You still were going to lose Ville Husso regardless. So I'm really happy with that trade. On the surface, it gave the Blues an extra pick in the 3rd round, and area of the draft where they've had some decent success recently. Colton Parayko was a 3rd round pick. Jordan Kyrou was a 2nd round pick, but still, these 2nd and 3rd rounds are areas where the Blues have had success, and getting an early 3rd round pick I think is great for them. Because like I said, best case scenario, it turns into a roster player that you can look back on and say, heck yeah, we traded away an expiring contract to get this guy. Worst case scenario, he doesn't pan out. You still have your other picks that you made in the draft that could very easily pan out. So, sort of a win-win situation for the St. Louis Blues and Ville Husso as well. He got himself a nice hefty contract extension. I think he was making $4.5 million with the Detroit Red Wings on his new contract, which was about where I projected his salary to be. And I said, I don't think the Blues want to do that. And sure enough, I was right. But now the question arises, what do the Blues do at their backup goalie position next season? Now, I tweeted out a good image of our favorite backup goalie in Chucky Sideburns. Charlie Lindgren had a really, really strong AHL postseason, helped lead his team within, I think, 2 or 3 wins of a Calder Cup championship. I don't remember exactly what the series ended up at. I think they were 2 wins away. Big part of that was Charlie Lindgren. And he's a guy that has had a ton of experience, had success with the Blues in his limited time last season, and could end up being the backup goalie, or Joel Hofer could be the backup goalie. But the reason why I have a little bit of concern with either of those guys, I think a couple other people pointed out on Twitter and stuff as well, is the fact that if you're worried that Jordan Binnington is going to have an inconsistent regular season again, you need to have someone more reliable than Charlie Lindgren in case you need to make them into the starter. Now, do I think that Jordan Binnington is going to lose his starting spot again? No, I think we saw the best version of Jordan Binnington we had seen in that playoff run. Unfortunately, he got injured and wasn't able to continue it, but he truly looked like he had returned to that form that he had in that cup run a couple years ago. And if we get even, 80, 90% of that in the regular season, then Jordan Binnington will be the full-time starter, and that's great. But he is coming off of an injury, and he has been notoriously inconsistent in the regular season. So if you're the St. Louis Blues, if you're Doug Armstrong, do you look at that and say, okay, we need to find a way to have a safety net in case Jordan Binnington does have those struggles again and does show that inconsistency again? I personally, like I said, don't think it's super likely that we see a Ville Husso situation where a backup comes in and carries the Blues to the playoffs. I don't think that they're going to need that. But, the Blues would be feeling pretty silly if that happened again, and you have to turn to Charlie Lindgren, who hasn't had an NHL level workload in a long time, if ever. I don't think he would be ready for it. I don't think he would be capable of, starting 20 out of 30 games or something like that. Same thing with Joe Hofer. But who knows? Maybe the Blues know something that we don't. Maybe they're fully ready to run with Hofer or Lindgren as the starter. But if they don't, it's going to be interesting to see what they do in terms of the goalie market. I don't know if they would go out and try to sign someone or trade someone. I'd have to take a look at who's out there, but for now, I think that we have to assume that Jordan Binnington is going to be that guy. He's going to be starting 50-ish games next year. and you're going to be treating your backup goalie as a true backup, which is something that the Blues haven't done lately. They've sort of had a 1A, 1B situation with Jordan Binnington. So if he can turn into, that guy and be a full-time starter, take on a full workload, then it's not going to matter who your backup is too much. The team as good as the St. Louis Blues, I think Charlie Lindgren would be a fine backup if that's all he is, or Joel Hofer. But if you're sort of looking to a 1A, 1B situation, then you need to address some things. Then you maybe need to bring in someone a little bit better, a little bit more experienced. But we'll see, that's something that's going to become more clear in the coming days, coming weeks, etc. So make sure you stay tuned to the Locked On Blues podcast, because that is all the time I have for you guys today. So make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on. That way you never miss a new upload. Hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel at Locked On Blues. Doing really well over there lately. I love the feedback, love the support. Follow Locked On Blues on all of our socials, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at Locked On Blues. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. Thank you all so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.